Hello and welcome. I'm Dennis Fisher. I'm the editor-in-chief of Decipher. With me today is my colleague Lindsey O'Donnell, our executive editor, and we're here to talk a little bit about this sort of wild situation with a vulnerability in the Barracuda ESG appliances. This is going to be a quick video. We just wanted to kind of get you all up to date on what's happening and where this all came from. Um, Lindsey, you and I have both written about this. The original vulnerability was disclosed, I think, about 2 weeks ago. And I wrote a piece about it, and it looked pretty serious at the time because it was, a module that does a lot of the email attachment processing in the appliance. And it had a bug in it where if it processed a malicious email attachment, you could get remote code execution. Seems bad. There's a lot of these in front of enterprise networks. And then, a couple days ago, it got a little more serious and a little more serious. And then there was an update yesterday that you wrote about that, took it to a level that I don't think I've ever seen before.
Right, right. Basically, yesterday, Barracuda came forward and said that affected customers have been notified and that it's updating its remediation recommendation to full replacement of the impacted ESG appliances. Now, I think we should also talk a little bit about the timeline because, Barracuda first discovered the bug, I think it was back in May 19th.
Right.
And then it deployed the first patch on May 20th and a second one the day after on May 21st. And that was, I believe, what you wrote about,
Hmm.
Dennis, a couple of weeks back. Then on June 1st, the company warned that attackers had been exploiting the vulnerability. So we're starting to see some exploitation here. And, essentially that they had obtained unauthorized access to, quote, a subset of ESG appliances, unquote. So what's really interesting here, obviously, is the full replacement of the appliances. That recommendation, that's really interesting. Another piece here that sticks out to me is that Barracuda said that they had found the bug had been exploited by attackers since October. And I think separately yesterday, Rapid7 also identified malicious activity that went back as far as November 2022. So, these guys have been on this for about 8 months. That to me points to a higher level of sophistication given the persistence and stealth that would be needed in kind of that type of timeline.
Yeah, and it's a long timeline, as you mentioned. That's 7 or 8 months, which, before, probably 6 months before it was detected, 7 months until now. And I think obviously based on the malware descriptions that Barracuda had in their most recent advisory, it's, three or four separate pieces of malware that they've identified already working with Mandiant. We should mention, I think we're obviously talking about a high level APT team here. Nobody's put out any attribution statements yet, but I think the usual suspects are probably in play. I think we'll probably find out more in the next day or two whenever Mandiant publishes their findings. But I talked to a few researchers yesterday, just sort of, texting back and forth with folks and asked them if they could ever remember a software bug being remediated by ripping out the boxes and replacing them. And I've been doing this a long time, and these are old school folks I was talking to. Nobody could think of an example.
Mhm.
And the only explanation anybody can come up with is this has to be some issue with the UEFI or BIOS, at the lowest level that will survive, a firmware patch. It's the
Mhm.
only explanation I heard that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that would make sense, and it does seem like it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
Um, they obviously didn't mention further details in the blog that was released yesterday, or a couple days ago. But they did mention that there has been backdoor persistence. So, obviously there is kind of a level of persistence here that may be warranted in order to potentially do this. But
Yeah.
we're still kind of looking at these details, and I think that um, there's a lot of kind of unanswered questions. Like we don't know, why did Barracuda update their recommendation? How many customers are impacted? Does this mean that appliances are, still under attack? I think we're still kind of
Mhm.
searching for those answers. Hopefully, we'll get a little more details in the coming days, weeks.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. And I think, for any customers that have these appliances, if they haven't unplugged them yet and taken them offline, I think today is the day to do that. Get that offline, because there's obviously advanced tools that are capable of exploiting this bug. And even if you have the updated patch level, Barracuda is recommending that you take these offline. So you take those offline, wait for the replacement, and then go from there. And hopefully by next week or so, we'll have more details and see exactly what happens here. But this is one of the weirder, weirder timelines and weirder stories I can remember
Yeah.
in 20 years. So,
Yeah, yeah, and one other thing that probably important to note, but ESG can be applied or deployed, both in a physical or virtual appliance, and this applies to the hardware
right.
appliance. So I know a couple people were kind of wondering that on Twitter, so
Yeah,
I feel like
that's an
important to note.
important yeah,
Yeah.
it's an important distinction. That's right. It's only the physical hardware box that's affected. So the cloud deployment is not affected. So all
Mhm.
right, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming in and explaining this. This is a tough one to get through, but I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great talking to you.